speaker?
I forgot.
That's all right. So we're going to look at mindfulness from the point of view or the teaching of Thich Nhat Hanh in his book, The Miracle of Mindfulness. This book has been around for a long time. It was first published in 1974 and was written in 1963 when Thich Nhat Hanh was in, sorry, I have to get rid of this. When Thich Nhat Hanh was in Paris, he was exiled from Vietnam at that time, and he was in Paris as leading the Vietnamese peace delegation. And so because he was exiled, he was not able to be with his colleagues, his followers in Vietnam, who were dealing with the war and all of the things that were happening in the war. So he wrote a letter to one of the monks there. And it turned out to be a long letter because he was really trying to send messages that would be encouraging and helpful and help to keep them kind of on the middle way, because it was imperative that they not take sides. That turned out to be not easy, obviously, but this letter to Brother Quang has made it through many publications, many translations, and people all over the world have found it to be really helpful. The first 100 copies of this, first I wanted to read to you. This is something from the foreword that explains what was going on in Vietnam at that time. So the students that he had left and the followers were working to do whatever they could to respond to the needs of the people whose communities had bombed, and helping them try to rebuild villages and teach the children, set up medical stations, all of that kind of thing. So the workers' methods of reconciliation were often misunderstood in the atmosphere of fear and mistrust engendered by the war. They persistently refused to support either armed party and believed that both sides were but the reflection of one reality, and the true enemies were not the people, but ideology, hatred, and ignorance. Because of this, they were actually persecuted, and actually some of them were kidnapped and murdered. But as the war dragged on, even after the Paris Peace Accord was signed in 1973, it seemed at times impossible not to succumb to the exhaustion and the bitterness. So they continued to work as best they could in a spirit of love and understanding, but it required great courage. So this is the letter that Thich Nhat Hanh wrote to his friends and followers, helping them to stay encouraged, to stay involved, to be uplifted at least a little bit. The first copies of this book, which turned out to be a book, the first copies, there was just 100 of them, and they were first translated and then printed in the bathroom of the peace delegation's headquarters, which actually was just an apartment. It was printed on a small offset machine that was in their bathroom. Thay addressed these copies to some of his friends in many countries. And since then, This book has been translated into many languages and can be found in almost every part of the world. The Miracle of Mindfulness has spread like ripples in a pond and has benefited a lot of people. And when I was ordained into the Order of Interbeing, I was given a Dharma name, and that name is True Transmission of Mindfulness. So I've had 6 years to contemplate what it means to transmit mindfulness. And I feel like I just barely scratched the surface. But I have to say that when I first learned about this name, we were sitting in a circle, and those of us that had been ordained, we were sitting in a circle, and Sister D was handing out our, I guess I'll call it a certificate. And she was saying everybody's name. So she read my name, True Transmission of Mindfulness. And I was just like, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. But the first thought that I had was about the word transmission. And I know this is sound a little bit weird, but I thought about a transmission in a car, probably because when I was a teenager, my 2 brothers liked to tinker with whatever car we had to share. And they were not allowed to mess with the family car. But anyway, they liked to, I don't know what they were doing. It's like they were exploring, taking things apart, putting it back together. And when they didn't really know what was wrong or what they could do, they would pull the engine. It's like just pull the engine. We had a hoist, a pulley in the garage, and they would just pull the engine up, and you'd come home and see an engine just swinging from the garage rafters. That's what I thought of first. Like, the engine is important, yes, but if you don't have a transmission, you can't move. You can't go anywhere. And so that was my first thought, is that transmission helps us to move. It helps us to go in a particular direction. Since that initial thought about my Dharma name, I've had some time to look at it more deeply and explore, how can I embody that name, really be a true transmission of mindfulness? So now I'm seeing transmission as an energy exchange, like the transmission that we receive when we take the 5 mindfulness trainings or the 14 mindfulness trainings. It's an energy that's coming down to us from our ancestors. It's in all of us. It's the thing that we transmit to one another when we're together. There is a company called HeartMath who have done a lot of research and proven that the energy from our hearts extends much, much farther than you would think, like 10 or 12 feet. So when we're sitting like this, we're sitting in one another's heart energy. We're extending our heart, and you're receiving energy from everybody's heart. So I've begun to think of my transmission of mindfulness as a way to share that kind of energy. And that requires a lot of attention and intention. So I find that I have to be, and I'm able to be a little more mindful when I remember that I'm continuously emitting some kind of energy. And then I remember that my intention is for that energy to be mindful, to be loving, compassionate, and kind. And I also then begin to see the correlation between mindfulness and awareness, which is not unusual when you consider that these are qualities that are found in the Eightfold Path. Let me read to you from the book. This is just an example of how energy is transmitted from people, from one person to another. Thay says, in a family, if there's one person who practices mindfulness, the entire family will be more mindful. Because of the presence of one member who lives in mindfulness, the entire family is reminded to live in mindfulness. If in one class, one student lives in mindfulness, the entire class is influenced. In peace-serving communities, we must follow the same principle. Don't worry if those around you aren't doing their best. Just worry about how you can make yourself worthy. Doing your best is the surest way to remind those around you to do their best. Only by practicing mindfulness will we not lose ourselves, but acquire a bright joy and peace. Only by practicing mindfulness will we be able to look at everyone else with the open mind and eyes of love. So remember that this is what Thich Nhat Hanh was writing to his friends who were still dealing with the war in Vietnam. And he was reminding them that if they can be mindful, peaceful, that energy will ripple out and be felt by others. The Miracle of Mindfulness has also helped me to see the connection between mindfulness and the ability to heal some of the suffering caused by the extreme positions we see in our country. People have taken sides here and there. I mean, you can see it all over the place, not just in politics, but in responses to the pandemic. There were divisions, people who, well, you know what the differences were. But we see that same thing in many, many things that are happening right now. So many different opinions about the climate and ways to deal with it, and people taking sides. And once they take sides, it's like they get so adamant they can't even hear another point of view. So these extreme positions in our country and in the world are actually inviting us to do what we can to create this energy of mindfulness and awareness. And, you know, there's so many ways that we might be able to do that. But the first thing is to know that I don't want to take sides. I'm going to do my best to see the middle way. And then when I do that, I will find ways to listen carefully, like the 5 mindfulness trainings say, listen deeply. And when I speak, do my best to speak skillfully, lovingly. But I think right now the main component is listen. It seems to me that people want to be heard first, and then there is sometimes an opportunity to speak. But deep listening might be the key to the beginning. So mindfulness is really needed right now. And it's needed to help us heal all this suffering that's been caused by the sharp divisions that we see in maybe our families, but certainly in communities, in cities, in countries all over the world. There are so many conflicts. There is the war in Ukraine. There are wars that we don't hear about in places that I guess the media think don't matter. But people are suffering, and mostly it's because somebody has decided this is the way it's going to be, and the other person has decided, no, this is the way it's going to be. And there's no communication. There's no connection. So I know that you and I are not going to be in a peace delegation anytime soon. But what we can do is be that mindful energy wherever we are, whether we're in the grocery store, getting gas in the car, wherever. Particularly if you know someone who's in the hospital, for instance, or you know somebody who's ill, being mindful of their situation and being willing to listen and to just give them some attention with that listening. You don't have to know an answer. You don't have to respond in any particular way, but just listening is very, very healing to a lot of people. Thich Nhat Hanh's little book also has a whole chapter on practices for mindfulness practices. And some of them we already know: walking meditation, sitting meditation, lying down meditation, eating meditation. All of these things we practice at a retreat. But there are a couple of things in here that were maybe not new to me, but I don't think I had practiced with them before. So I wanted to introduce these and see if we can practice these mindfulness, do these mindfulness practices together. So the first one is called following your breath while listening to music. So we're going to listen to a piece of music. It's something that Cornell recorded. And Thich Nhat Hanh tells us to breathe long, light, and even breaths. Follow your breath. Be master of it while remaining aware of the movement and sentiments of the music. Do not get lost in the music, but continue to be master of your breath and yourself. So let's listen and see if we can just be mindful of the breath. You can close your eyes if you want, but that's not essential. We're just going to follow our breath and listen to Cornell's playing. Just kind of check in with yourself, like this music is always heart opening to me. Were you able to follow your breath and just kind of be with the music? You know, when we're singing or chanting, that's also a really mindful activity. Because if your mind wanders, you've lost your place. You know, you're no longer singing with everybody else or chanting, you're just somewhere else. So singing either to yourself or with a group is a really good way to train your mind to be mindful, to train yourself to be mindful. So the other practice that he talked about is called following your breath while carrying on a conversation. This is something I had never done. So we're going to pair up in a minute and just see if we can practice this. He said, again, breathe long, light, and even breaths. Follow your breath while listening to a friend's words and to your own replies. And then he says, continue as with the music, just to continue to not get lost in the conversation, but to continue to pay attention to your breath. So look around, see who can you pair up with, just right around you. And in a minute, I'll give you a signal and we'll start. I would suggest maybe, since maybe you don't know some of the people here, you would kind of introduce yourself and tell your friends something about yourself, something that you enjoy doing or something like that. And then it'll just be, you know, very short, but maybe an introductory type conversation. So let's find a partner.
Stop recording.
So were you able to follow your breath and still be in the conversation? Please say no.
I started really visiting, so
You can turn on.